Well, I think it would be cool too if we started, if you wanted to introduce yourself a little and talk a little bit about like the work that you do and some of the stuff that you offer. And then we can
Yeah.
talk about like your background, and then we can kind of segue into just an organic conversation on the limbic system and how your work integrates into that.
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
So intro wise, I'm Chrissy Marie, and I have a history as both an embodiment guide and a therapist. I started off doing work with families and working with children who had difficulty with self regulation. And I did a lot of like family work, going into homes, doing a lot of like on the ground observation and communication skills, work with parents and whatnot. And then I transitioned into working with currently I work with a lot of fellow practitioners, so wellness practitioners, whether that's, yoga teachers, energy workers, coaches, therapists. And I started to transition into focusing a lot on working with the inner child and the layers of the inner child. So, like inner children, really, and supporting people in creating a distinction between the parts of them that feel small and afraid, and the parts of them that feel grounded and creative and confident, and teaching people how to reparent their inner child, and through that process also take themselves less seriously and learn how to play more, and all of that really in the spirit of feeling more alive and enjoying their work, especially with wellness practitioners. A lot of the people I work with, they feel either burnt out or really in their head and out of their bodies, and so teaching them how to drop back into their bodies, create a sense of safety and home within themselves, and learn how to really enjoy their work and make it more sustainable, less of a drain, and more of something that inspires them. So, yeah, and I do a bunch of stuff under that umbrella. Like my business, it's called The Art of Aliveness. And underneath that, I support people using breath work techniques, somatic techniques, very holistic in that I use a lot of different things. I do energy work, I do intuitive coaching, I do all sorts of little, a lot of little variations of things, a cornucopia of modalities. But at the core of that is this belief that everybody I work with knows what they need to heal, and just pointing them back to that inner knowing.
A lot of times in the chronic illness community, we've become so externalized in our source of power. And Western medicine really does a horrible job of being like, you have to go to this doctor and this specialist and take this medication, and we know what you need. And then it takes away that sense of, inner knowing and wisdom of what might be causing an imbalance or what we need to heal. And it really externalizes that sense of control and that sense of motivation, which we know as therapists, that internal locus of control is so key in like mental health disorders developing with depression and feeling hopeless and helpless. And so I love that idea of like, parenting yourself and diving into the somatics and the integrative practices. So yeah, I think that's so interesting. Do you see a lot of what could be perceived as limbic system imbalance or chronic illness or chronic pain developments in your clients specifically that seem like they struggle with reconnecting to their sense of self or their bodies, or from that sense of trauma? Like, have you seen that show up in your work specifically?
And I have a couple clients currently that are dealing with chronic illness, and there is what I've noticed is this disconnection from the body, and then the chronic illness, it almost feeds into that, because it's like as soon as, even with people without chronic illness, as soon as I invite somebody to tap into their body, often they will say things like, "Oh, I have a pain there. I wasn't aware of that," or "I have a headache. I wasn't aware of that." So they'll start to notice the language their body is speaking. And sometimes that is through pain and discomfort. And often that's the reason why they stopped paying attention in the first place, because it was uncomfortable and they didn't feel like they had the resources to hold that. So then when chronic illness kicks in, and the discomfort gets really high, the desire to dissociate from the body gets higher as well. And so, yeah, it's this catch 22 of, in order to move through that process, we've got to turn towards the self and develop a capacity for holding, space for discomfort. And it's challenging.
For sure. And there's a fear there, and there's a fear of what might come up. And if you've compartmentalized or dissociated for so long, it becomes scary to think of what could come up. And I think that's also where the parts work and the inner child stuff comes in, correct? Like, why did we dissociate in the first place? Or why did we compartmentalize in the first place? So is that something that you focus on with some of that parts work and exploring, like, why did that maybe fracture off, or where did that discomfort begin?
Absolutely. Yeah. And something that I found people have found to be helpful through that process is learning how to create distinctions between the different parts of them, like the part of them that dissociates, and then the part of them that gets angry, the part of them that procrastinates, the part of them that feels depressed or feels anxious, and teaching people that these are like layers, like personas that they've developed in order to keep themselves safe, and starting with teaching people about the function of these things, like even though it feels dysfunctional and inconvenient at times, it's like this is a part of you that thinks it's doing things for you, like it's trying its best to keep you safe and secure. um and one of the things that I think people don't always understand, but it can be helpful to understand, is you know, are that the limbic system and that more primitive area of the brain, it's designed to move towards what's familiar, even if what's familiar is uncomfortable. And so it thinks that by keeping things the same or keeping things the way we're used to, if we're used to dysfunction and chaos as kids, then it's going to try to, maintain that sense of dysfunction and chaos, because the chaos is what's predictable versus feeling good, which is unpredictable or sometimes associated with a sense of not feeling safe.
I love that parallel, because I think we talk about, from like a CBT perspective, just like negative feedback loops that just become really ingrained because they form those neural pathways. And now that's the path of least resistance. And then from that yoga perspective, like samskaras, which is that spiritual idea of like an ingrained pathway. Like when you picture someone who walks the same path over and over through the woods until it becomes a recognizable path. So like spiritually and energetically, we have those, set ways of being. And then psychologically we have that. But you're saying too that sometimes it doesn't make sense cognitively, but chaos and dysfunction starts to feel so comfortable that becomes hardwired and ingrained. And so what would you say, as far as like with your approach, how do you talk to someone who comes to you and maybe they're starting to recognize that they've become comfortable in the chaos, but they want to change because they're recognizing like it's leading to the burnout, or they think that's where their pain is coming from? Like, what are some of the steps you take to approach that with them?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would start with is normalizing that when they start to change and make shifts, there is going to be some discomfort involved. And a lot of times people will say things like, "Well, does this doesn't feel authentic to do?" And for as long as you're comfortable in wherever you're at, any sort of change is going to feel a little bit inauthentic. So creating and just having a conversation about the distinction between, like, is this just growing discomfort versus is this not right for me? And so one of the things that I'll do with people is start to support them in developing a sensory prescription menu where they get curious about the different sensory stimuli that create a sense of common connection for them. And then we use that process of creating common connection through the senses to start developing the part of them that is like centered and grounded and knows exactly what they need to hear and knows exactly what the next step is. So we start with that, normalizing the discomfort of growth, creating a strong centered self, whether that's a version of them or a symbol like an animal or something more abstract. It could be an archetype in a storybook or, a esoteric being, like whatever they need it to be. Um, and then I start creating characters with people around the parts of them that feel anxious or whatever the loop is that they're trying to pattern interrupt. I will support them in creating a character, naming it, creating abstract associations with it. And then by taking it outside of themselves and creating space between them and the experience, it's easier to take that into conversation, and develop not just an understanding, but an ability to be present with it with less shame. Because that I find is what creates, that's what sustains the pattern, is shame about the pattern, feeling like I'm wrong for having this pattern, or I'm wrong for feeling addicted to drama or chaos. It's like, nope, you're just human. We all do this. And so a lot of my sessions are me being like, it's just a human thing. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, normalizing, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's a big thing too that we talk about is like we have to work on like normalizing this idea of everyone's going to have a reaction to the stressors that life throws at us, you
Yeah.
know? And so it would be weird if you weren't having a reaction to some of these stimuli. Like, I always say like, yeah, like look at all these traumas you've had, or look at this medical issue you've had. Like if you were fully functioning right now as if nothing had gone wrong, that would be concerning. Like what would that tell us? So there's so much we can learn and dive into, and just normalizing and showing people that it's okay to have this experience, but also it's possible to heal. And you said earlier, which I love, like we have what we need to heal. We just need to allow ourselves to access it and to create a life that has structure and routine that allows us to access it too. Because when we get caught up in those pathways of negative, self-talk, or feeling isolated, or we think that there's shame, so we don't want to try something new because we're afraid of failing, then it gets really scary to try to make that change. And then we don't allow ourselves access to the things that might help us
Mhm.
because we're ashamed, or we have self-sabotage, or we don't think we deserve it, or we don't think it will work for us because we think we're so different that we
Mhm.
can't heal. And I think that goes in a little bit. I love, and I always come back to acceptance and commitment therapy in a lot of our work. And this idea of you have to accept that life has sensation and life has pain. Like we're never going to just get rid of pain. The goal of healing isn't to get rid of pain or discomfort or the fact that illness exists. The goal of healing is to have all those things present, but be able to commit to living a life in alignment with your values. And to say, like, despite the fact that maybe some of these symptoms or some of these stressors in my life aren't going to go away, that's a part of life, but they allow me to dive into those parts of myself that can handle it. And really, like you said, to build up an inner strength and resolve of, well, I can get through that, but my life shouldn't be just getting through. Now, with that realization, what do I want to enjoy?
Yeah. And not feel like any particular moment defines you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I think we could have discussions for hours about this stuff. And I thank you so much for like joining me to dive into this work, because I know that you have such a similar like passion for it, and a similar model of how you think it should be integrated. So thank you for that. And I wanted to give you some time too, if you wanted to share a little bit about where people can find your work, and what offerings you have that might be interesting to other people. Because I think that would be so useful and healing, even just to like hear your podcast, and to be able to resonate on a deeper level with that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. The podcast is called The Art of Aliveness. It's on Spotify and iTunes. My website is also The Art of Aliveness. My Instagram, if you want to follow me there, is at Come Alive with Chrissy. And yeah, in terms of offerings, I have a little virtual community where every month I do a live breathwork ceremony. And then I also do a live masterclass on the art and science of creating spacious living and regulating the nervous system and connecting to the inner child. I have like a whole archive of master classes and whatnot inside the membership. So people can come in and watch replays or join live if they want. It's kind of like like you said, a choose your own adventure type situation. And that's called The Spacious Place. And then I also have a course, a self study course called Spacious. And that's all about developing a sense of safety and capacity for spaciousness, both in our schedules and in our bodies. So there's some modules in there on boundary setting, and a lot of nervous system work on creating space from the inside out. And then my private work is also on the website. So if people want to work with me privately, they can just message me, check out some of the offerings through the website and whatnot, and happy to jump on a call and talk about what that would look like.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing everything and for agreeing to be part of this. And I think if you're open, I'd love to have more conversations with you in the future, because
Yes,
so much of this work integrates so well, with what we're doing in the program. So
absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thank you.